might sit cross-legged.
That's probably more chill, yeah.
More chill
Okay,
vibes.
leg up.
Rude. Okay. Hello everybody. Welcome to The Line, episode 1. I'm Alice. I have two wonderful guests I'm really excited about having with me today. Aimée.
Hello.
Zainab.
Hi.
And today we're going to be discussing racial identity, mixed race identity, and just like how to navigate the field of identifying with your culture, with your heritage, and the general discourse around it. Okay, anyway. So, Aimée, do you want to explain how you identify culturally, ethnically, etc., etc.?
Sure. So I'm half Japanese and half English, so half white, half like person of color. I think a lot of my identity or like thoughts on my own identity have come from interactions with other people and how they perceive me, or that has kind of forced me into thinking about how I identify myself. But a lot of times in England specifically, I felt quite othered or kind of defined by my Asianness, which sort of leads me to identify mostly as Japanese or Asian in sort of majority white context, just because that's how I feel others perceive me. So it's sort of easier and makes more sense to me to say I'm Japanese. But on the other hand, when I'm in Japan, I am definitely not Japanese. So then I'm white or foreign, but then with a tangible and visible link to that country where there's a lot of like issues or sort of debate about how half Japanese people fit into Japanese society. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like a weird one.
There's actually a literal word for it.
Yeah, right? It's borrowed from the English, but it's hafu, which you could even take to mean that they literally aren't part of Japanese society because the word itself is taken from English. Like there's no actual word for a half Japanese person in Japanese, right? So it's written in a different it's written in the script that's used for foreign words. Like it could be seen as a derogatory word, but it's becoming like stylish to be half because you take a lot of like the physical features of like a Westerner, which is obviously again like another conversation, but to do with beauty standards. So it's a bit complicated, and it leaves me sort of like in a bit of a limbo area because like in one of my countries of origin I'm the other, and in the other I'm still the other, so like where do I belong really, you know? And I don't really have the choice in a lot of those contexts which one I'm like identified as. But yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, Zainab, how about you?
Okay, I am Sudanese, I'm African. I identify as a black person. But even though it's like in Sudan, there is this conversation that are we black, African, or are we Arab? Because we are Muslim and we speak Arabic. So it's like, who are you? People like government and society, they're pushing this Arab thing. We have to be Arab. So lighter your skin is better. And like if you speak Arabic, it's better. So yeah, I think it's important that people in Sudan realize that we're not Arab. We're definitely African, like 100% African. It doesn't mean anything that we speak Arabic, but like we look African and we should identify as African.
Do you think like, sorry to interrupt, but like
go right ahead, that's the point.
Culturally, do you think Sudan, like a lot of the cultural elements are closer to like your African neighbors as opposed to like Egypt, for example, which is very much or pushes itself as an Arab nation and not as an African nation? Like which one do you think Sudan's culture is closer to?
Oh, okay, this is interesting because Sudan is like, there's a lot of cultures, a lot of languages, a lot of colors, a lot of different like cultures, like music, everything. So I think this Arab thing made people divide, like, so people just like, if you're not speaking Arabic, so you're not good enough,
right? So kind of like pushing away the
but like the African theme or the African soul is there, it's everywhere,
right?
We look like Ethiopians and Eritreans, and you don't see them talking about, are we this, are we that, we are black, we're African, that's it. I don't know why we are, because I think because of the Arabic thing.
Yeah, you have
that's
a
why
claim
just
to
like
it.
debating.
On that note, just an explanation of why we're all wearing blue today. We're wearing blue in support of the Sudanese people. And there will be a link in the description down below and probably on a post wherever you're seeing this with suggestions from Zainab and from me and anything we can find on the internet of how you guys can help with the situation in Sudan. And yeah, we're just wearing blue to raise awareness for that.
Thank you for that.
Of course. Okay, so I'm gonna just introduce myself, and then as you can see, we've got some knitting going on here. If you're listening, you can't see, but head to YouTube if you want to see us knit at the same time.
Yeah.
Just to make it more chill. Also, Zainab taught us to crochet yesterday, so we're putting that to good use, making little bags. We're obsessed. We're just gonna sit, have a conversation, relax. You guys get your knitting on. I might knit, I might not, because I'm at a hard part, and so I feel like I might not be able to do it at the same time. I'm just gonna explain myself, and then let's just have a chill conversation. So I personally am half Arab, half European. Further complicated by the fact that on both sides of my family, I'm half Arab, half European. So my mom is half Lebanese, half German, and my dad is half Egyptian, half Italian. I grew up with my mom in London, so I grew up near my Lebanese grandma, mainly hearing Arabic around at home, so I kind of understand Lebanese culture, Lebanese food, and the language a lot more. But I visited my dad a lot, saw my dad a lot, so I still feel like in touch with those parts of myself too. Right now, we're coming to you from our home in Cairo. Amy's studying abroad here for a year because she studies Arabic, and I came here for a month to study Arabic, specifically in line with this conversation, to get more in touch with that part of my like Arab side, which is my dad's side, the Egyptian side, learning some Egyptian dialect and stuff like that. So yeah, that's me. And then both of us also grew up you're half English. So you grew up in like one of the two countries you're from. For me, I grew up in none of the countries that I'm from, and like I speak 3 languages, none of which have anything to do with my heritage. So it's like a really big entanglement of stuff that's going on. I'm going to do a little bit of knitting until I get to the bit that I'm stuck at, and then I'm going to need Zainab to help me when we're done. But okay, let's kick back into the conversation. Zainab, how do you feel being a Sudanese person in Cairo? Because we were talking earlier, Amy was asking you, like, do you identify as a person of color, and how even within people who have dark skin, there's different degrees of darkness. And Amy was just saying here in Egypt, they're really desperate to be Arab, right? So even though you're not that far away on the continent, even though you speak the same language, do you feel like the cultures are similar? How do you feel like do you view yourself differently in Cairo to how you did back home?
Yeah, I do. Like, I've never felt weird or different in Sudan, but here, like, you can't help but feel like a foreigner, because you kind of are, but at the same time they're always talking about like how Sudan and Egypt are the same country, like back in the day and whatnot, but it's so different because they're so Arab, and because we're black people, for them it's like, even though I speak Arabic, sometimes in the street they like talk to me in English because they think that I might not understand Arabic. And sometimes people express like, how do you speak so good, or like your Arabic is so good, how is it, how come? Like,
and you were like, I grew up
speaking Arabic. And in Ramadan they ask like, are you fasting? And like, hey, I'm wearing hijab, so like, what do you think? I don't know, Egyptians are a bit weird, like this kind of way. They're nice but weird.
I guess that comes from their own confusion in relation to I don't want to speak for the Egyptian people, but like from what I know, I feel like there's a lot of confusion about national identity and like where it fits in to like the African continent, because it's part of like I've forgotten the name, but I think it's part of the equivalent of like the EU but for Africa, like, you know, like an economic, or certainly there's like relationships between its African neighbors, right, but it's also seriously Arab, and it's identity and like its language and its relations to the other Arab nations. So it's like very confused from my perspective, right?
And it reflects that by like trying to distinguish itself
from like Sudan, for
from
example.
other people.
Yeah. So I think that's, but like generally in Egypt, I feel like coming from England, the general sort of like awareness of like the racial conversation is quite limited from like my experience. Like even just as like an Asian walking down the street, I will have, which is not unusual as a tourist, but like I'll have a lot of people saying like ni hao and stuff, and there's no awareness that could be taken in the wrong way, right? Because that's just normal behavior.
Even like more educated people, quote unquote, not to use that at all in a derogatory way. Like the other day we were sharing a cab with somebody who like was a well-educated person per se, and she asked us where we were from. We said, oh, we're from England, blah blah blah, and then somehow it came out that Aimée was Japanese, and she said like, oh, I knew, like I could tell from your eyes, like kind of like this,
which I get a lot actually,
like which, you know, to them it doesn't even occur to them that like doing that to an Asian person, I'm sorry, maybe I shouldn't even be doing it on camera, but doing that to an Asian person is kind of offensive, and it has like a history of a lot of like mockery with that like gesture, but they don't even do it because they don't care. They do it because they don't even know.
There's no awareness that would even be perceived as like derogatory, but I think that might be because there's not such a big Asian community here. I don't know how many Asian tourists they get, but it's certainly not a huge amount. Like there's not that exposure, which would bring maybe a slight awareness. I don't know, I'm not sure.
Yeah, but I think like even Africans feel the same way, because the awareness is so like not here. It's weird because like there was this actor or something, she's a big actor, and she had like, I don't know, it's a comedy thing, and she put on a paint like a blackface on TV, and it was like it was nothing. Yeah, so where are the producers and
everyone's like
so many steps along the way someone was like, yep, that's cool, that's fine. So many people approved that,
and nobody said anything until Sudanese people were like, no, this is wrong.
Wow.
And then she was like, she apologized, and she was like, I didn't mean to offend anybody, but like how do you
not mean to do that?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
It's like you sat there in the chair having it
made
put on
a conscious
your face.
decision.
But that's the thing, like I just wanted it to be funny. It's like how it's that ability to like take your race for 2 minutes, make it funny, and then like wipe it all off, right? Like I don't know, like for you, why do you feel, I mean, I know that I agree with you that it's not like an okay thing to do, but how do you feel, how does that make you feel? Why do you feel like that's so not okay? Yeah, like seeing someone do blackface, like
it's like you making fun of somebody like for something that, and that the thing is like, even I don't know, like Sudanese people wasn't too offended by the sorry, my English.
No,
this is great. Like
honestly,
offended by the blackface itself. They were offended because she was playing this thief kind of thing. So they were like, no, Sudanese people aren't like thieves, so why are you saying that? I was like, no, the whole thing is wrong. You don't get to just put a paint on your face and like laugh about it and like this is fine. It's not fine.
Yeah. This is the thing that Alice and I have had this conversation a lot.
Okay, I was gonna bring this up. So.
But it's like, it's strange because I always think about this, that if you've grown up in a context where you are not the other or the minority, so like in Sudan, like everyone looks the same, right? Or like in Japan, everyone looks the same. So you've never felt that like sensation of being othered because of the way that you look. If suddenly you're then exposed to some sort of type of racism like that in the TV show, so the Sudanese community took an issue with the way that the actor was like playing the Sudanese person as opposed to like the way that they were made up, or like the classic conversation of like, if a white person wears a kimono, like, is that wrong? And then like a Japanese person will pop up on the internet and be like, no, that's great because our culture's being shared. But then someone like me, I would take offense at that because I've experienced being the other in the white context, so I know what it feels like to be othered. Whereas I think if you have grown up just amongst your people, which is great, you haven't necessarily experienced what it means to be the other in the white context, or
because
like in the
non-native
exactly,
context,
like in the
way.
Egyptian context as a Sudanese person or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, because like the thing is with the whole cultural appropriation conversation, which I probably would want to do a whole other episode about, is that it's the discrepancy between, like I was talking about Blackface, being able to put it on for 5 seconds to make a funny joke, or being able to put on a kimono for a prom or a ball for 2 hours and have everyone be like, wow, you look so exotic and beautiful and ethnic, and take it off and be white again. And you having that culture be, as you said at the beginning, the way everyone views you every single day in an otherizing way. Yeah. And like Japanese people have never felt that otherization, so they can't grasp the element of it that's like, you get to wipe it off and I don't get to wipe it off, because they don't feel the like repercussions of not being able to wipe it off because they're amongst themselves. Whereas when you can't wipe it off, you're amongst other people who constantly see it as different. Like I know that's what you just said.
And I find that like the argument, like obviously I always think that race and identity is such a personal issue, so all opinions are going to differ, like even just slightly, but there's a lot of rebuttal of that argument, like, oh no, but like Japanese people wear jeans, or like the reverse argument, which fine if you want to justify it that way. Like I understand that is, you know, that is the reality, like Japanese people are wearing jeans, but it's the point is that comes with a history of like trying to emulate the West for certain reasons, such as colonialism, and like the West always being more powerful than those that it colonizes, right? So of course Japanese people will want to emulate like America because it's always wanted to be that great Western power, but like that doesn't make it right. And yeah, as you were saying, it's like if someone who hasn't faced the realities of being like an Asian person in England, and obviously Asians don't face maybe as bad racism as other people of color do, but it doesn't mean that it's not bad, and it doesn't mean that it's fair for them to like take the nice elements and then not endure the like snide comments or whatever it is, right? So it's difficult, I think.
Yeah, I could literally talk about cultural appropriation for ages,
honestly.
But yeah, I'm going to try and do another episode on that, because just as a sneak peek per se, the fact that like in the States there's a football team whose mascot is like the Redskins, and the mascot is a Native American. It's like you just took someone's actual race and made it the mascot of a team. Meanwhile, they're the most underprivileged people in the whole country. Yeah. Anyway, so to me that's just like absurd, and I think it needs to be talked about more, because people think it's just like, oh, like n'importe quoi, like I can put on a bindi if I want to, but it runs so much deeper when like a whole sports team is like, you never name a team like the Asians or the blacks, you know what I mean? Anyway, so but trying to veer the conversation in another direction per se, I've got some notes here, I'm just gonna have a little cheeky peek. I was thinking about the kind of like picking and choosing and like being able to wipe off your culture, being a mixed race person, or like for you being the like completely Sudanese person, how do we feel about like claiming that identity? So like you said, people always, or in the context you're most frequently in, which is England, people see you as other, so that's kind of pushed you per se to claim that otherness more strongly than you would with like your British identity. But then for me, I don't look super Arab, like I'm fairly white passing. I could be maybe Spanish or Italian. I am part Italian, but so like am I allowed to claim, you know, like you just said, claiming like, oh, you took jeans, even though that's a different thing. Am I allowed to claim, you know, oh, I've faced this because I'm Arab, when I don't really look it, or when I'm half Arab? Like I was asking you guys earlier, like just before we started rolling, what, like, where is the line? Like if you're half Arab but you look visibly Arab, you're allowed to like claim the struggles of an Arab person? Or what if you're half Arab and you look white? Or what if you're a quarter Arab, like, or okay, I'm actually half Arab, but let's say you're a quarter Arab but you're only a quarter of anything. You're a quarter Arab, a quarter African, a quarter Asian, a quarter this. Are you not allowed to like claim any of your identities? Like how do you guys feel about,
I don't know, as I said, I think racial identity is so personal, because it's not just about appearance. Like of course that plays into it a lot, and it affects people's experiences, because if you are visibly more black or more Asian or whatever, you're going to experience more day-to-day like microaggressions or aggressions
Yeah.
or like specific incidents that you can talk about. But I think identity is also formed by your cultural upbringing, because like, for example, so I grew up like predominantly like raised by my stepmother, who is Japanese, right? And I didn't really realize it, but she was raising me in a much more Japanese way than I had ever really thought about. And then I got to university and I was like, oh, okay, so culturally, even though I'm not completely Japanese, I'm definitely not fully British. Like, I don't understand all these references to whatever, like I've never eaten these kinds of food
Sunday
at home.
roast every
Exactly,
week,
because I was brought up on rice and fish and like whatever, you know? So all of those things are part of my cultural upbringing, which play into why I identify a lot more with my Japanese side in many ways. But then I've never lived in Japan, so someone can sit there and debate like, oh, but can you actually claim that you're that Japanese if you've never lived there before, or if you don't specifically fully speak the language? But I don't think that that's anyone else's place to say, because it's about how I personally feel, right? And also it's like, if you have experienced incidents to do with your race, then I think that like it could spur you to kind of reject it, but for me it spurred me to like reclaim it and be really proud of it. So like Alice and I had an incident the other evening. Is it okay for me to talk about it?
Yeah, go ahead.
And we were at dinner, and essentially it just turned into a bit of, well, it felt like to me some white men debating my racial identity and being quite confused as to why I would be able to claim that I'm Japanese if I'm only half, because that's the normal answer that I give if someone's like, so where are you really from? Because clearly they don't want
That's
to
what
hear
the
the
answer
answer.
they want, yeah.
They don't want to hear the answer, oh, I'm from London. They want to hear, oh, I'm half Japanese, and then they'll go, oh yeah, I thought so, right, whatever. So they were debating my racial identity, and then they made it into a more like fetishizing, exoticizing conversation to do with like sexual stereotypes of Japanese women, which was extremely uncomfortable. But like that kind of incident makes me think, well, you're clearly perceiving me as this part of my identity, so why can't I just be proud of that instead, you know?
Instead of being like, I'm not that Japanese stereotype, you're like, I'm not that Japanese stereotype, but I am Japanese, and this is how people truly are Japanese.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like they don't care about my English side, sorry. But like
No, it's fine. I just was like, I'm sorry you had to go through that.
It's like they don't actually care about my British side. Like that side of me was basically irrelevant to them. So, and it's not irrelevant to me, but it's like, if they're going to sit there debating how Japanese I am, then why don't they care about the fact that I'm, you know, like why can't I just choose my own personal like cultural identification?
Yeah, they don't know
and
all the little things that contributed to
exactly, because it's such a personal journey, you know, and I don't owe them an explanation. Like I can give them the explanation if I want to sit there like and educate them, but that's not on me, I don't think.
Yeah. And like for me, not exactly the same as Amy, but like how I identify culturally is hugely to do with how I was brought up, because like I said, I was brought up mostly Lebanese as compared to the other three parts of my heritage, but still not super Lebanese because I wasn't in Lebanon, and like even my mom's only half Lebanese, but my Lebanese grandma was around. I don't properly speak Arabic, but I heard Arabic around, and I had like Lebanese food. There's this kind of confusing, not Lebanese enough but still Lebanese, and then there's these other three parts of my identity that I didn't really grow up around. But I would identify like I wouldn't identify to the point of if someone said, where are you from, I'd say Lebanon, as Lebanese. But I identify mostly if someone asks me like, which part of yourself do you feel the most like, I'll usually say like, oh, I've felt the most Lebanese influence like all my life growing up. But even just being here for a month, I feel like so happy to connect with that part of myself, and like to meet my family that grew up here. Like my grandfather grew up in this city, and he was like one of my favorite people to ever exist. Even if I didn't grow up around him, you know, I still feel like I learned from him, and it's still important to me to feel like I can claim those pieces of him that are in me as well. Or like my grandmother being Italian, like I didn't grow up in Italy, but I went to Italy every summer and had those Italian summers where you're on the beach and there's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rows of different colored umbrellas and Italian kids running around and screaming everywhere. And like my mom's half German, and like she didn't speak German to me, but I can see it in how she is sometimes. Or we went and visited Germany, you know, when I was growing up too, and that's why I try to take up German at uni. Keyword tried. I'm not very good at it, but that's why it's kind of like strange. I told both of you this story before, but how once I was at the dinner table, kind of the same example of what you were giving type thing, and it was me and my family, so like my mum, my uncle, some close family friends, I think, and like some not so close other family friends who were also Lebanese. And I made some joke about Lebanese culture. I think I said, oh, that's so typical of Lebanese people, or like typical Lebanese grandma, something like that, you know, all in jest, as I always do.
Know
something
well.
Exactly, that I made that comment. Like the only way I can know something's typical is because I've experienced it enough times to know, like, oh, Lebanese grandparents always do that or something, right? And someone at the table said, you can't say that. And this is like a grown adult. This isn't even like a teenager, or this was maybe like a 50-year-old. I don't even remember who. It was maybe 10 years ago or a bit less, but it stuck with me. Like, you can't say that. And I said, well, what do you mean? Like, I'm Lebanese. Like, I'm speaking from experience. Like, yeah, but you're only a quarter Lebanese. Like, you're not completely Lebanese like us. And I was just like, okay, but you don't know my experience. Like, you're negating the fact that my predominant experience growing up was Lebanese culture. And also, I'm only a quarter of anything. Like I was kind of saying before, like, what if that happens? Like, yes, I'm half Arab, half European, but they're still different countries. I'm only a quarter Lebanese, a quarter German, a quarter Egyptian, a quarter Italian. So if I'm not Lebanese enough, I'm not Egyptian enough, I'm not Italian enough, I'm not German enough to link myself to one of those cultures, then like, what am I allowed to be? Like, am I allowed to joke about anything, you know?
My Japanese family, I've had like several times where they'll be like, oh no, but you're not Japanese, or like, you don't look Japanese at all. And I'm like, but I want to look Japanese. Like, I just really fully want to just fit into like one part of my identity, and like, I don't understand why my facial structure is so clearly to you like not Japanese, you know? Which is so weird. And then I get this like strange validation if someone's like, oh, like, are you Japanese? I'm like, oh my god, how did you know? You know, like, it's like that weird, it's like validation that shouldn't, identity. But it's like this validation that I've never ever had, right? So it's like a strange thing. I don't know, I just wanted to bring that up because it's
How would you feel like as a person that's like completely one thing? Do you think you'd ever be that? I mean, knowing you, I don't think you would. But do you think you'd ever be that person that, like, if there was a mixed race person who was half black, who maybe looked mixed race, maybe looked more white, maybe looked more black, like, would you maybe say, like, hey, you don't actually understand our struggles as, like, black people in a Western world, or even in Egypt, where people look on you? Because I get that, like, on the one hand, it can be true. Like, I'm not hijabi. Like, if I go through an airport in the States, I'm probably not that likely for people to like look at me and think bad things about me because I'm not Muslim. And I don't want to try and claim I'm so discriminated against because I'm half Arab when I'm not. But at the same time, you know, like, I'm still part Arab. Like, how would you feel if someone was like, oh, like, I feel this way, and would you ever be like, well, not as much as me, or like, you know, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I feel like black people in Africa, they don't have that bad experience because
that's where
this is where you're from, and everybody's black, and it's not weird to be black.
Yeah, of course.
But I hear people like in America or something that talk about like, if you're black but you're white passing person, then you're not really black.
Yeah, you're not black enough.
Yeah, you're not black because you didn't suffer enough. Like, but they're still black, you know, like partly. But they get to be like black, and maybe they had bad experience. You don't know.
Yeah.
So
they like I think from like I've attended the my university's women of color sort of like forum or group, and like I think a lot of it can go the opposite way. Like, if you grow up in I don't want to speak for anyone, but like if you grow up in like say a black community and you are completely white passing, like I think a lot of people would probably experience, and like how I've experienced with my Japaneseness, like you want to look back black because that is your cultural identity, and you don't.
Yeah, you grew up with black friends, with like black culture, black people, like,
and then to have
cooking
your
your
physicality sort of like invalidate that in a way from the eyes of someone other is would probably be really sort of upsetting in a way. Like, of course, they would recognize their privilege in relation to someone who has darker skin than them, but I think that is a kind of a different conversation, I suppose. But like, if your physicality doesn't correlate with your cultural experience, I think it's quite hard to sort of like bring them together in a way, or like at least consolidate them in front of someone else who just doesn't understand your context, you know. And like to have to justify yourself to someone else is actually an emotional labor in itself, I think. I don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a strange one, because like that might be the case if you're more white passing and you grew up in a black area, or you're mixed race. Like, do you know Halsey? Did I show you her already? I showed you, I think. She's a famous singer in the States, and she's mixed race. I think she's half black. I think I know her dad is black. I don't know if he's also half, but anyway. And she looks completely, she could pass for completely white. And she's never like claimed like, oh, I faced so many struggles in America because I'm a black person or anything like that. But she has said like, oh, my father experienced this, so it's important for me to fight against it, or something like that. But she's, let's say, just as black as Zendaya, another famous person. I don't know if you know who she is, right? She's gorgeous, and like she's visibly mixed race, and people wouldn't necessarily like question her identity in that way. But I think, like you said, for me, like if I was asking myself the question, which is kind of the theme of the podcast, like where do you draw the line? It's about like recognizing it. So if I like, and I'm like a white passing person, so like if I'm talking about something to do with being Arab, I'm not gonna pretend that I experience the same thing as like a Muslim woman, or like a more dark skinned Egyptian who's like more visibly Arab. And I guess, I don't know, would you agree that it's about, maybe like you were saying, that person who's more light skinned is just as much allowed to say they're black? Maybe it's about saying like, yes, I'm black like you, but also like I know that I'm never gonna have the same experience. And the thing is, I guess, okay, here's another question, just to like keep going, even though I didn't really finish. Is it necessarily a worse experience to be the more ethnic one? And the reason I'm asking this is like, darker people in the States at least, and maybe like in Egypt too, definitely face like worse things, in the sense that at least they don't see themselves represented in media as much. Like the black people are usually mixed race, or light-skinned black people. They'll be visibly targeted, like by police, by like verbally abused by like racist people more than a light-skinned person. And those things like objectively seem a lot worse. But then as a mixed race person, you have this fight for your identity, which is not the same as fighting for your actual life, or like defending yourself against people saying racial slurs. But it, like you said, it's an emotional labor. So can you really say that like it's harder to be darker than it is to be mixed race? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I would say.
You think it's harder?
Yeah, it's hard. Like even in Sudan, I feel like if you're whiter, or if you have like Arab culture, then you're better in a way.
Like the way that anybody will treat you in society.
If society, like will see you, everybody will see you like beautiful, or like because you have like long hair, stuff like whatever, then you're beautiful in a way. Like, I don't know, because like I said earlier, because everybody's pushing this Arab thing. So the more Arab you look, the better, in a way.
I think it's like two separate conversations, because obviously it's all like a scale. So even like within the like people of color community, there's people who experience worse discrimination, of course, just because of how the world works currently. But on the other hand, like as we were saying, like if your visual like appearance doesn't correlate with how you identify, I think there's a lot more struggle within the self, like if you want to, because some people of color just genuinely don't feel a connection to their other half, or like they're like more like, I don't know how to say it, like they're like exotic, like quote unquote,
all in quotation marks, ethnic,
like ethnic nationality. I don't want to say it like that, but I don't know how to compare, like they're non like white nationality. Some people just completely don't feel a connection to it because their visual appearance doesn't correlate. But if it does, I think it's quite a hard journey to become your own identity and to become secure in your identity, because you're constantly having people identify you for you, which I think really elongates the process a lot. Because for me, I hadn't experienced racism until basically the age of 18, and up until that point I didn't really feel I obviously identified as Japanese, but I don't think I was as passionate or as that's not the way to express it, but I hadn't really been forced to contemplate myself within the people of color community, because I had never been othered in that much of a blatant manner until I was literally verbally abused by a white man. Fine, but that is literally someone else othering me, and that is what placed my consciousness in the kind of oh, I'm a woman of color conversation, so it's kind of weird. I think it's two different issues, and one side of it you're grappling with your selfhood, and the other side you're grappling with society's perception of you.
For sure.
Just as
I think you put it really well. I just want to make it clear, I wasn't trying to say, oh,
no.
Identity struggles are the same thing as not getting jobs. Of course, one is objectively a lot worse than the other. But I think another thing to maybe talk about. Actually, hang on, the camera is maybe working, maybe not. Hello. Whew. Okay, sorry, the camera died. We're back. I'm gonna keep the audio in, by the way. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Oh my god, what were we just talking about?
We're talking about grappling with selfhood, and then
okay. Another kind of curveball in the conversation, but what about identifying with your culture at all? For me, for example, I realized relatively not that long ago, I'm kind of the first generation of people that's gonna have 4 different grandparents from different countries. Maybe my parents' generation, there are some people that are from 4 different places, but because of globalization, because of transport, industrialization, that's possible now, and it wasn't before, and I never really thought of myself in that way, because people are always oh my god, wow, that's so cool, and to me it's just normal, obviously. And then I realized that's just gonna be the world more and more. We're traveling a lot, we meet people from different countries, I'm very, very unlikely to have a child with someone who has the exact same ethnic mix as me. So maybe in a few generations' time, everyone's going to be kind of a mongrel, just a mix of loads of different things, at least in the West, where people are more able and privileged to be able to move around and leave their country per se. But on the back of that, the question I was thinking about was, how important is it to preserve cultural identity? Because for me, for example, I think if I have a kid, they're going to be an eighth of everything that I am. They're going to be a quarter Arab, a quarter European. But if I wanted to teach them what I know about Egyptian culture, what I know about Lebanese, blah, 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 that's a lot to try and put on them, let alone the other half of them. And then their kids, it's going to be even more diluted, which to me is really sad, because I don't want them to lose the things I love. Is it inevitable? Is it sad? Maybe it's not sad. Maybe it means we're all gonna eventually become global citizens. Why do we place so much value on culture anyway? Does it matter that much? I
think for me personally, the culture thing. So my biological mother passed away when I was 7, right? So for me, that was my way to keep my link with her. And luckily for me, my dad remarried a Japanese lady, so I had that physical bridge to my own culture and influence as well, and she was very kind to instill those cultural values in me, as I said. But for me it was a very important thing that I preserved that within myself. But then as I said, I've encountered people who are half whatever, and they really they literally identified as British, and that was fine. They had no interest in saying, oh no, but I'm also half this, I love whatever. And maybe that's just because we never got to that stage in the conversation and we didn't sort of dwell on it enough
and flesh it out.
But for me, as a woman of color who would probably present that in the first 5 minutes of conversation, oh yeah, I am half Japanese, as something that I'm proud of, I think it is, as I keep saying, like, it's so personal and like so to do with experience, because if you've grown up outside of that cultural context and you have no need or desire to like preserve that, then maybe it isn't important. I don't know. It's like, I think it so depends on the person.
Yeah. It's weird because some people will say things like trying to be unifying. They'll say things like, I don't see color, or like to try and say like, we're all one, we're all the same, you know, which I understand,
but
because yeah, like I understand the intention, which is that, and like fundamentally, like we're all from all these different places and we're sitting next to each other, like, and we are all women, all living on this earth, all with, you know, like chatting and like enjoying each other's company. But there are those differences, and I guess like, I don't know, it's hard for me because
it's a good thing though.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's nice that everybody looks different and everybody have different backgrounds and different ideas, and like, why does that have to be something bad? Why can't we just like celebrate each other? And yeah, you're black and you're beautiful, and you're white and you're beautiful, and Asian, like everybody's beautiful, and we have to like, we don't have to be one person, like look the same. Like, why?
I think the thing that I like take issue with in like the race conversation is that I think it's quite a scary place to be, like either as someone who like, it's like for me when I was 18, right, and I was coming to it like really new, and like I honestly wasn't like as politically aware as I am now, like maybe through fault of my own, or maybe just through like the privilege of not having to be aware, but like I was ready to be part of it. But then I was so scared to take part in it at the same time, because you come into it, and maybe this is my only like my personal experience, but there's all these like people of color who are so vehemently like passionate about the topic, but it closes it down to someone who wants to ask the questions but is ignorant, because you have to seek out the answers, but how are you meant to get the answers if people expect you to already know?
No, in the first place, absolutely.
And I think also, like Zainab said, the white person should be involved, like white people should be involved in the conversation, so not necessarily to like put their like perspective in it, because sometimes it's not their place to give their perspective, like they have to just hear people of color out, but they should be part of the conversation. And I think it's so closed, and like anything that you say that is maybe strays just slightly from like the line of thought that's been accepted is just immediately like, how dare you say that? But it's meant to be a conversation, it's not just a one-sided dialogue. Like there's several different parties involved, and I think it's really like, it's kind of a shame in a way that like I was so scared to be part of it, because I felt like, oh, maybe I'm not like a person of color enough to be part of the conversation. But my experience is just as valid as the next person. It's just that you have to take into account that experiences vary, and some are of course worse than others, you know, but it's like the conversation is just so,
it's very, I think,
exclusive, I guess.
I think it's, well, I was gonna agree with that, but go for the emotions behind it, which is that it's very fueled by very real,
of course,
I know you know this, but very real emotions and anger a lot of the time, because of course, if just because of your race or how you look, like not only are you treated differently, but the entire history of your people is insane. I mean, like, you know, colonialism, imperialism, all the things that like generally white people, also people of color have done, but you know what I mean, are crazy. And like to feel like, oh, this happened just because of the color of my skin, of course you're gonna like feel so powerfully about that.
Yeah.
But
100%.
as you said, the result is that instead of saying, I feel so powerfully about this, I want to share it with as many people that I can, so like when they come to me, I'm gonna do everything I can to like make them want to listen. Is it's like, I'm just gonna shout what I have to say, and if you want to listen, and if you maybe have a question or you want to like interrupt me to like clarify something, like no, I'm just gonna keep like shouting what I'm saying. And I completely understand it, and it's, we've talked about this before, but it's a whole like big dilemma within like the community, I think, which is, do you know who Audre Lorde is? You would love her. She has this quote about, I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's something about you can't use the master's tools to take down the master's house, or maybe it's the other way around, you have to use the master's tool. I don't remember, but basically the question is like, to what degree do you make your protest palatable and accessible to the people you're protesting against, you know, because you want them to hear you, but also then you're kind of just reinforcing the whole thing of like doing everything their way, right? It's like, I want the government to hear me, so maybe I have to like you know, be nice and like write a letter, or like for Black people, what I've heard from like the Black community in America is like, you can't be too loud or aggressive because those are like stereotypical Black. But then you don't want to be like not being yourself to please the white people so they listen to you all over again. It's such a weird one. I guess that's like a huge just thing to unpick. Like, how much do you tailor your protest, whatever that be it like posting in Facebook groups or writing letters or going on the street or talking, to be digestible and like understandable to like the other, right? I don't know. What do you think?
Oh, sorry.
No, I don't.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I was just thinking, like, maybe it's two separate conversations. Like, maybe it's like the community coming together and like sharing their experiences, which is what is so powerful and so empowering. But then there's a separate conversation and like this other side of the coin, which is like sharing the result of that dialogue within, like, amongst each other with like the oppressor, and like
making change
and like, but making that dialogue more healthy and like gearing it for change. Because I think the anger should be amongst the community, and obviously it's directed like to like the systems that are oppressing people of color, but like at the end of the day, as you said, like the anger doesn't help anyone really. It's like you need to channel that anger into productive change, which a lot of people are doing. Like there are a lot of movements and like dialogues and I don't know what, right? But it's like maybe there's two separate conversations which are like both going to the same thing, but it's like steps along the way.
I think that's a really good way to think about it, like to compartmentalize it into, there's the positive of having like a people of color community wherein you get to share, like I always say, like I love having like women around me to talk about my experiences as a woman, not because I hate men or because men can't understand if you explain it to them, but it's exactly that, you have to explain it to them because they haven't lived it. And so it's so valuable to have a community where you don't have to explain yourself. You can say, I experienced this, and someone will go, me too, or I completely understand.
Yeah, it's honestly like, right? Just like
it's like a way of, I'm literally feeling goosebumps right now. Like,
it's so empowering.
Being able to like just sit here and talk to you guys and say stuff and not have you question me it's like a safe haven. But then, like you said, and like you were saying, taking those questions, the thing is that's part of changing people's minds and like letting them in and letting them understand what you go through. So I think, like you said, it's a good way to think about having like one part where you share with each other and you like, it's cathartic, and then the other part which is like, okay, dealing with like the other people and answering their questions. Because I had this in a different sphere, in the sphere of like sexism and like men versus women. I had this conversation on Facebook once, me meddling in Facebook comments as usual, where it was this silly argument about, I don't want to dismiss it silly, but as in it was a minor detail about there was women's only gym hours starting at my university, and some men were saying like, this is sexist, like blah blah blah. I didn't even engage in whether or not there should be gym hours, but some man commented like, if you don't want to be looked at in the gym, go work out at home or something. What? And I was like, woo, here we go, baby. Time to shut it. No, I'm kidding. But wow. I was like, okay, I feel the need to respond to this, to like, if not to make him aware if he's really stubborn, so that other people reading the conversation see the other side. So I just said like, listen, that's kind of, it shouldn't be a woman's responsibility whether or not something creepy is happening to her. You should put it on the person doing the creeping, right? Anyway, it turned into this huge comment thread, and I tried so hard the whole time to be respectful, not in a patronizing way. You know, some people can be respectful in that way that's like, I'm above you, like just to let you know. And a lot of people were doing that, and I like words, I like writing, I like speaking, so I care a lot about like, I choose my words carefully. Maybe some people don't, but I noticed how much little things, like the men that were responding to me saying, sorry, but blah 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 blah, or like, just to let you know, or, by the way, which is this like condescending, patronizing, trying to have a respectful conversation, but just these things were giving away that they weren't. And everything I'd be like, I would acknowledge the things they said that I agreed with, I'd acknowledge the things I didn't, and say, I see where you're coming from, this is how I think though. And it's so draining, it's so emotionally draining. I spent like an hour doing that just because I was like, I need this conversation to be visible from both sides. And a guy commented and he said, he like tagged me, he said, thank you so much for like answering all these comments and for answering respectfully and for genuinely sharing what women go through, because I've always wanted to understand.
Wow,
but a lot of the time when I comment something completely politely, just like, oh, how come blah blah blah, or like, why do you feel that, people assume it's an attack and immediately say something like, they tag a friend and they say, lol, typical man comment, and then I never get answers because they're mad at me for not knowing the answers in the first place. But then I can't, and honestly it like that made it all worth it. Like my friends were saying, log off, like why are you doing this to yourself? But I just had this feeling like if anybody, one person reads this and feels like more open to the conversation, then it's worth it. So when that guy like, and I sent him a message saying like thank you, and he asked me for book recommendations and we shared, I was just like, we need that like open
Yeah,
conversation.
I hear you, because I'm the same way. I get so passionate when like, especially about women stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, like how you, in Facebook, like sometimes people will be like, oh, I got like sexually harassed, or like somebody said something, like, and every man will be on the comments commenting like, oh, maybe you weren't wearing something like good enough,
right.
maybe you're out late or something.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like,
Are you
no, you don't
joking?
get to say that. Like, no, it's not about that, because like in Sudan, this is like the reason. If you got raped, it's on you because you were wearing something or you were doing something.
Is that like inside women's, like, do women think that too? Or
some of them, which
Right.
is to me is just crazy. Like how are you gonna grow like out of this? How are you gonna fight this if you
So
don't even
internalized.
know what's going on? Like people don't get to tell you what to wear, just to avoid getting like raped. You have to wear some, like, and it's not even working. The funny thing, it's not working because people with hijab and like even like covering their faces get like harassed on the
It's
street.
like saying, oh, it's your fault that you got wet in the rain. Okay, it kind of is, for not wearing a coat, instead of being like, oh, actually, like, it rained, that's why I got wet, because it was raining. Like, like even if you know it was gonna rain either way, even if I was wearing a coat, it was just gonna rain on the other person that wasn't wearing. That's the scariest. Okay, this is a tangent, but that's the scariest part about that for me, is saying like, oh, it's your fault for what you wore, is basically saying, let him rape the other girl who's not, and because that you're not focusing on the fact that that person had that intention in them for somebody. You're basically saying protect yourself, let it go to somebody else, like, instead of saying, okay,
let's stop the actual issue.
And you don't even get to talk about it. Like the funny thing, it's not funny, like the worst
crazy
thing,
yeah,
you don't get to talk about it because then you get blamed for it. But I really think women need to talk about it, even in comments, because like no matter what, you just need to talk about it. You say no, you stand up for yourself, you say this is wrong, it's not my fault, it's a sick person, and it's not your fault.
I agree. Women, just taking a little look at other.
We went so far. We drifted.
No, but that's the point. The point is to like see where it goes, and like just that's the thing. The reason I came up with this idea in a way is that like we have so many conversations like this just sitting at home, and so I just think if people could listen in, maybe they'd learn. Not like we're so clever, but maybe they'd learn one thing about like our perspective or our experience,
and they start
or
the conversation for themselves.
Exactly.
Have, like,
it's not that what we're saying is right. It's that like we're having a conversation. Like join it, you know.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it shameful to identify with one side of you rather than the other side of you? So I guess you can't relate to this in terms of like being mixed, but maybe like back to the like Arab African thing. Do you, like, we've kind of touched on this already, but would you find it like a shame for someone to view themselves as like, I'm Arab,
Yeah.
I'm not, right? Because you feel like you're losing a part of it, right?
Yeah, I feel like you don't have to say that just to feel better about yourself. You're black, you look black. Be happy with who you are. That's enough. Like, but like you'll see people who are obviously black saying, no, we're Arab, and I just think it's a joke in a way. It's like, no, and they're so serious about it. It's just sad.
Yeah. Well, how would you feel if, like, let's say people who grew up in England or grow up in France or grow up in the States, who are like second generation or third generation, so they've never even been to that country maybe where they're originally from, or they never even speak the language. Do you think it's maybe like sad for them to lose their connection to like African culture or Asian culture or whatever it is? Or like, okay, so two questions in a way. One, do you think it's sad? Especially in the context of like what I said earlier, where probably in like not that long, everyone's going to be everywhere and it's going to be almost impossible to like retain that.
Yeah.
And two, do you think there's a responsibility to like pass it down to your children? Like, do you think parents have a responsibility to maintain their culture? Especially like, sorry, one last thing, in somewhere like America where sometimes, I'm not trying to generalize about America, but like somewhere where showing your culture can mean you're treated as other, and if you just want your kids to fit in and have a better childhood, maybe you think it's better for you not to make them too like ethnic, you know? What do you think?
I think for the first question, I definitely think it's a little bit sad because you're missing so much. And even me growing up in Sudan, when I travel like around Sudan, I feel like, oh my God, I didn't know those people were here, you know? Like, because it's so just like Arab all the time, and Muslim, and everybody's so different in every place, and you feel like, oh my God, they're so neglected in a way. And I wish I knew a little bit about those people. They have like the most amazing culture, and it's sad that we don't know about it. And I feel like it's our responsibility, wherever we are, to pass this out, like for the next generation, just at least know where you come from. Because it's important, and like you said, because people are gonna be like all over the place soon, it's nice to hold on to this thing like a special thing. Like it's
Definitely.
just yours from home. And so yeah,
That's true.
did I answer all of them?
Yeah, dude, that was you're doing so well. It makes me laugh when you're like, my English is so bad. I'm like, your English is better than my English half the time. I'm like, and you're just the perfect
Like, oh my God, I hit like.
Yeah, I say it all the time.
Yeah, literally, you just stop.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's exactly what I was talking about, because I'm like, kind of like I said, it's weird for me because I grew up not even in one of the 4 places that I'm from, but from in England. So people ask me where I'm from, I'll usually say I'm from London, mainly because it's easier than saying, I don't want to be too pretentious either, now that it's like cool to be mixed, to say, I'm from here, here, and here, and here. But then the weird thing is I don't feel like I'm English. I feel like I'm from London, which is the multicultural, open-minded, super diverse city that I grew up in.
Yeah.
But none of my upbringing or how I grew up says English specifically, okay, like the sense of humor, the TV I watched, but mainly not really. And I kind of feel like, am I losing like parts of who I am, or is it sad for me to not feel connected to one or the other, kind of like you were saying? And that's why I've taken it upon myself, as I was explaining before, to try and like make my Arabic better, and I want to try and learn Italian, and I try to learn German, but yeah, it's just weird because it's so much. And like I'm so grateful for my mother for like making the effort of trying to make me learn Arabic, because it can be a huge like weight, I think, on parents to try and enforce their culture whilst in another culture at the same time.
But just a little bit.
But yeah, I guess like my mom sent me to Arabic school, and like also it was like a privilege that she was able to do that. But then it's strange because at the same time my dad never really had interest in, like, he doesn't really speak Arabic or Italian. He used to ask me like, why do you go to Arabic school, even though he's also half Arab. He grew up in DC in the States. So I don't know, I just find it such a weird one, because
I think language is such a weird one because like I always felt like not good enough for not being able to speak Japanese. Like I felt it was such a disappointment and such a like defect in my selfhood, I guess, like as a Japanese person. I was like, if I just spoke fluent Japanese, it would make my life so much easier, and I would feel so much more validated in like identifying as Japanese, because so much of the culture is rooted in the language and just like being able to identify and like communicate with Japanese people, like that's a big part of it. But then that's a weight that like my brother has never felt, you know? So it's like, again, it's like it's super personal. But like maybe your dad, like growing up, I guess like with his parents, like across the other world, and like across the other, like
Other side
of the world, yeah. Maybe they didn't feel like it was important for him, especially in the States. Maybe like, don't want to generalize about the States again, but like maybe at that time it was not the time to be like connecting with his like Arab side and his Italian side. Like my godfather grew up in America, and he said like I actively distanced myself from my Korean side because I was the only Asian kid on the block. Like this wasn't the time to be but which he regrets now. But it's like all to do with context, I think.
Yeah, whereas my mom grew up in Beirut, like in the middle of the war.
So she grew up in her like cultural context, quote unquote.
So to her, it's probably hugely like giving a piece of your life to somebody. Like giving me the ability to speak Arabic is like have this piece of my life and like what I experienced from my mom, because like she grew up speaking that language and like in the middle of the like war in Lebanon, and like Lebanese food and Lebanese people everywhere. Whereas like for my dad, I guess he maybe doesn't, because you can understand things hypothetically and not realize them personally, like you said. So maybe he had never had that personal value in language enough to be able to like recognize how it could be valuable in turn to me in a way other than just like getting a job or this or that. Okay, wow guys, we've spoken so much. I'm trying to think if there's anything I really wanted to.
Is it still working?
I think this actually good question. I think the camera might have died, but that's okay. Oh no, it's still working. Is it recording? I don't know.
Hello. No,
it's not. So this happened. It's memory card's full. You know what? I'm going to transfer this across, and while I do, let's have a little break. And if anything comes to our head, and then I'll do like the conclusion in a second. But if anything comes to our head, we can always add it on.
Nice.
Thank you so much, guys. That was such a good
I've crocheted so much.
Dude, it looks so good.
Yeah, it's huge though.
It's a good size.
But like, I hate this part.
Why?
Like this part.
No, yeah, it's fine. It's like a little hat.
I think you can fix it though.
Yeah,
you can fold it. It looks so beautiful this way.
But how shall I do it? Like after? Really sweaty. I'm really hot. I was like sweating. I was like, I hope this isn't coming off on camera.
Well, now I have it on film.
You can look glistening.
Yeah, that natural glow. Highlight, right? Natural highlight.
Okay.
Is it recording?
Oh, sorry.
Dude, it's not recording.
Yeah,
oh,
it
it is.
should be.
Sorry.
Oh, autofocus. Yeah. Okay, we're back after a brief interlude to bring you some concluding remarks. Autofocus. Focus.
Focus on the mic, which I guess is the most important part of this.
It's them.
Okay, we're all good now, I think. Whatever. It's the concluding
I
thoughts
should
anyway.
probably stop crocheting. That's okay.
You can crochet.
Okay, well.
Okay, we're back after a brief interlude for our concluding thoughts. And to wrap things up, I realized first episode how hard it is to like be on your toes about a topic for so long in a row. So thank you guys for bearing with me and for chatting with me and for knitting. I would like everybody to see the progress Aimee has made on her really cute bag.
Yeah.
Leave a comment below if you would purchase such a bag. And maybe she'll have a business.
I doubt
I would.
it. It's Zainab. It's all Zainab. I'm just saying.
I made no. We could crochet things and sell them and raise money for Sudan.
Oh my god.
I think we should do that. Should we do that?
Yeah. Well, if you're
Okay,
watching, anyway.
If you're watching,
Irrelevant.
we might be selling bags. Okay. Concluding remarks. Okay, I'm gonna ask both of my guests. Focus. I'm gonna ask both of my guests, Zainab and Amy, for their concluding remarks, and I'm gonna ask them a question right now. Where do you draw the line about identity? How do people use any framework, or how do people decide where to draw their lines around their own racial identity? Especially like Amy said, when we live in a world where people kind of try to draw that line for you and say, you're this, you're allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that, you're allowed to behave like this, you're allowed to wear like this. Wear this. Yeah, what do you guys think?
Well, I was saying to Alice before, I find the whole race conversation itself kind of, well, first of all, like intimidating, like I was saying before, but also strange in the sense that you obviously can only speak from your personal experience, and like you can read about other people's experiences, but you will probably, unless they're from like the same race as you, never be able to fully empathize, right?
Even if they are.
Yeah, even if they are, like you haven't had that experience maybe, so then you can only imagine what it feels like. But it's kind of strange because when you're speaking about it like we have been, I think it is almost quite important to speak in general terms, because like that's the whole point of like discrimination. It's like discrimination is a scale, but it's still objectively discrimination, right? And in terms of other people drawing the line for you on identity, like that is never okay, I don't think, because identity is so personal. Like you have chosen to draw the line somewhere for a reason, or you've chosen not to draw the line for a reason, and that is no one else's like right or place to try and take that away from you or to question it for that matter. In terms of like personally drawing the line, I find that it really depends on my context. So like in some contexts I will really like not play up my Japanese side, but I will definitely call on that side of like my identity more. And in other contexts, I like when I go to Japan, I definitely feel like I've been raised in a Western context, because my ideas on certain topics don't align with like people my age in Japan, and that's perfectly fine. Like that is part of my cultural identity, and I'm proud of that, because from my perspective, like my Western education has allowed me to be really open-minded, where the Japanese system may not have like fostered that. So that's like the really cool thing about being like a mix of things, and like being able to like choose where to draw the line. So basically, like I've been saying this whole thing, it's just personal, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's just the fact that it's personal means that no one else can or should draw the line for you. And like that's basically the whole premise of like many of the experiences that I've had, which is where people just say like, oh, you're Asian, so you're this and this, or like you're Asian, so I can like sexualize you in this way and this way and this way. And it's like, well, I am Asian, but I'm also half English, and also like that doesn't give you the right to say any of those things, like just because you've profiled me in that way, you know. I guess that's my
nice. Zainab, how do you feel about defining identity, cultural heritage, etc., etc.?
Oh, I think I agree with Amy pretty much, but I feel like it's important to keep the conversation going. Just talk about it, and I think people need to be more open, so don't be offended like right away, because some people don't know. Just be open and say like whatever you feel, and if somebody said something that you felt it's wrong, do the courtesy of telling them this is not okay, and just try to educate people, and keep it moving.
I think that's an interesting, both of us are thinking about that right now, because rolling off the back of that, and to like conclude it myself, we were talking about that the other day. When something offensive happens to you, it's hard because you feel hurt, and you don't want to feel hurt and fetishized or like profiled and go through the like emotional labor. I've been told that term has specific uses and not others, so sorry if I'm using it in the wrong way.
Yeah,
but
I think it's like emotional labor.
Doing the emotional labor of like not only being hurt, but being like, hey, you shouldn't do this, or I don't like it when you do this for this reason, completely respectfully. Also, because then you become that person. You're such a party pooper, like why do you have to take everything so seriously? So it's hard to balance like being hurt, feeling a responsibility to say something, trying to say that thing in the right way so the person listens to you, but also saying it at all can like then put the burden on you of being that person at the party who says something that's not fun. But I think, like you said, and we were talking about this the other day, it doesn't make you wrong or like a bad person or not taking on your responsibility to not in that moment explain how you feel.
Yeah.
But I think in an ideal world, once you can come to terms with that within yourself, like I would like to be able to take the hit and think to myself, okay, this person either doesn't really know what they're doing, what they're saying, doesn't know how it's impacting me, or they don't care yet. Maybe they'll never care, but here's an opportunity for me to say like, oh hey, I get you probably thought that was funny, like no worries. This is how it makes me feel though, for this reason. Like I know you probably didn't mean to like be really rude to me. I don't think you're a bad person or anything, but like this is how it probably will make people feel. And that might go down badly. Maybe people will feel attacked, but I think for the most part, as I was saying to Aimée, if you come to people on the level they're at, not necessarily like pandering to them or speaking in their voice, but if someone says something jokingly to you that you don't like, which we've both been on the receiving end of, my instinct is to like lash out. And I never yell at people. I'm like not an angry person, but I'll be like, hey, like what the but I think the best way is, if it was a joke, laugh at it for like a second, try and stay on that plane, maybe be like, haha, okay, like
not funny,
I get what you were doing there, but actually dude, not super cool. So that you don't, because I think the second you stray away from the tone that person is at, they feel attacked, or they feel you're looking down on them, or they feel you're victimizing yourself, and you don't want either. You don't want them to think that you think you're above them, and you don't want them to think you're victimizing yourself. You want to try and say, hey, we're equals here. I'm telling you my experience.
Yeah, and you want them to listen as well. You don't want
exactly.
to shut them off.
You don't want them you don't want them to feel embarrassed to the point of being scared to ask questions, like you just said too, and you want them to listen.
Yeah, I think it's just like that is like the ideal situation, right? But it's like building yourself to that level. And like it's weird because the power that like the person who's using their words against you like has on you is so intangible yet so real. Like the way that they can make you feel as if like saying all those things, even if you were coming at them like on the same level, is something that you're doing wrong. Like like the fact that your feelings immediately feel like, ooh, those are not valid feelings that I'm having right now. Like it's a really strange thing to try and overcome, I think. But it's just, I think it is about like coming at them on their same plane so that they at least they can hear you. They might not be listening, but they can hear you, which is like, I guess, even that's just important, or like just to start, I guess. I don't know.
It's hard because like you said, it's kind of a double-edged sword where like you're being offended, but if you actually get offended, then you're not only being the thing they've just called you, somehow like racially profiled you or whatever, you're also being overly sensitive, and your feelings aren't valid, and like you need to just grow thicker skin. So it's like,
I was like, step back down, like why are you,
it's like trying to reconcile that all at the same time, like having someone say something about you that hurts you, processing that, whilst also at the exact same time feeling like you're not allowed to feel that, because if you express that, you're being too sensitive, this and that.
It's
and
also
like
the like aggressor, quote unquote, like in the situation, like as soon as you come back at them, they immediately turn themselves into the victim, like which makes you the aggressor. So like the situation is just turned on its head immediately, which is obviously not what is happening. It's like the victim is standing up for themselves, but because you don't want to be called out for being like racist, quote unquote, or not even quote unquote, but like it depends on the situation. Of course, you're going to be like, oh, no, I would never be racist. I would never do that. I would never mean to say those things.
That's not what I meant. Like, why are you saying that about me or whatever?
Exactly, which is, that's not necessarily what you're saying. You're just saying that wasn't cool. Like, this is how that made me personally feel. Because, like, I guess, I mean, it depends on how obvious or how, like, ambiguous the comment or whatever it says is. But, like, again, it's so personal because, like, one comment could really touch a nerve with someone. And for someone else, it's just brush it straight off. And it's also, like we were saying, which I think is like maybe quite a good point to end on, it's like, it's not your labor to do. Like, like, I was feeling pretty bad about not responding to a comment that was made to me. And Alice said, think about it this way, like, the last time that this person made that kind of comment, the person who was like the recipient,
the person before you
didn't say anything, and so they said it to you. And that, we're not blaming the person before me, but it's also saying, like, maybe the person after you who they make the comment to will be in a good enough place, or like be in the right state of mind to just sit that person down and call them out on it. But it's nothing, that is not a failure on like my part for not saying something.
Otherwise it's like saying the people on the receiving end of the like stress or aggression or whatever have to do absolutely every step of the work. You have to do the process, you have to protest, you have to write the letters, you have to explain your feelings, you have to like process your feelings fast enough to respond immediately in a way that's at the right level and the right tone. And it's like you can't do all that and be on the receiving end of things that like question your identity and your feelings. And I think, like you said, I think that's a good note to end on. Like you've been saying, it's super personal, and like you've been saying, you want to try and keep the conversation going. Exactly. So and in a way, I know this is kind of a weird way to think about it, but in a way you're keeping the conversation going by doing what you can and then passing that conversation on to the next person to do what they can when it happens to them. And maybe even if just slowly by slowly you're taking that person down a peg, not like in a rude way, like squashing them, but like taking their intolerant views down a peg, you're each contributing what you can to like keep that ball rolling and keep that conversation going more than you would probably if you tried because you felt like you had to, you lashed out at them and you made them even more likely to be rude, right? So just like do what you can and do what you feel capable of doing, and also like protect yourself, not in a shielding way of like not being out in the real world.
Don't expose yourself to anything.
Not like shut yourself off from everything. But like don't be so hard on yourself as to take the weight of the whole world and like the whole problem all on you.
Like I think it's all about processing for yourself first, because like at the end of the day, your cultural identity is like your reality, right? And how you choose to identify, and then like anyone else around you who questions it, that's like it's your sort of journey to dealing with that too at your own pace, I guess. And
as I always say, fill your cup first and then you can fill the cups of others. Like it's really hard to pour water into other people's cups if your cup is empty, so you have to be like at your best to be able to do your best for other people.
And everyone gets to that point at different paces, I guess. So
thank you guys for joining me.
Welcome.
Thank you for watching if you're watching. For listening if you're listening. For listening if you're listening. I love ASMR. Just you wait for some ASMR videos. This was the first of many episodes, hopefully, with 2 wonderful guests and more people to come. And hopefully like every conversation can keep going. Like this is our first conversation about race. I'm going to try and jazz it up, have some different topics, body image, addiction, sustainability, all sorts of things. But we can always come back to this. If you watching or listening are interested in adding your perspective on the topic, maybe you come from an ethnicity that's not represented here, maybe you have a mix that we haven't talked about, maybe you are adopted and have a different ethnicity to your parents, let me know. Get in touch with me. Twitter, everything in the description box below, in the show notes of this podcast. I'm aware it's unfocused. Let me know if you want to have a chat, come on the podcast.
There we go.
If you have a different topic that you would like to discuss with me and want to like draw awareness to the nuances and complexities of something, let me know. Come talk to me. We can knit, we can eat, we can cook maybe, we can like make brownies and have a conversation and invite other people in the world into that conversation. Thank you guys, and see you next time.
Bye.
So exciting. Thank you guys.
Thank you, dude.
Oh my god, you're such a good host.
God.